That's all right.
Okay. Right, now it definitely is past, so
Yes, go for it.
I'll get going. Okay, so again, welcome to our fourth webinar in our Parenting with a Coaching Mindset series. Today, we are focusing on parental self-awareness, acceptance, and leadership. I think it's going to be quite an exciting webinar. We have three amazing mums and coaches with us, and I'll be here in the background facilitating. I'm not going to be a panelist as such in this webinar because I'm not a mum, and I feel that this needs that experience from parents and that input from parents, but I might jump in every now and then. With us, we have Komal, Smriti, Lorraine, Moos, and Tracy Brown, and I'm sure they'll all introduce themselves a little bit more when we start. It's going to be an hour long, and I don't know if anyone managed to make last week, but last week's webinar was on difficult conversations with your kids. It was good fun. We had a laugh. We had some interesting conversations, that was for sure. So if you missed that, I highly recommend that you go and check that out. And I will get going. Oh, and before I do, if you would like to ask any questions in the chat, you can, but please select to all panelists and attendees, and then everyone can see your questions. I will keep an eye on the chat box and ask any questions that pop up that are relevant. Okay, right, so over to our first section in this, which is self-awareness. So I'm wondering, panelists, if one of you or all of you would like to answer this following question. How important is paying attention and focus to your inner landscape as a parent? And to do that more than focusing on the actions and behaviours of our children. So how important is the inner landscape of being a parent? And I would like to start with Tracy, if that's okay. And I will just unmute you, Tracy. There you go.
Thank you for that. Yes, so self-awareness as a parent is important because that actually helps us be aware of our own triggers. And it will help us be cognizant of what may be happening within us that is causing the trigger versus focusing on the behavior outside of us that we can't control. So when somebody in our lives, whether it's a child or a spouse or a co-worker or anyone else outside of us is behaving a certain way, oftentimes our reaction can be to have it be about the way that they're behaving. And we can't control that behavior. And then that goes into a narrative that plays out in usually fairly predictable ways. But when we're self-aware, then that will help us realize what it is that inside of us that's creating that. And I'll just give you a super brief example. It just came up for me within the last week or so. I was in a situation where somebody, I don't even know if they necessarily did something, but it was their state of deep being bothered me. And I found myself getting into this sort of narrative about, you know, lack of respect and smugness and this and that and the other thing. And it was at one point in my life, and not that long ago, that would have really just been what had stayed with me. And I would have formed an opinion of this person, and every interaction would have just built on that. With self-awareness, I was actually able to think, well, what was happening within me? What was going on at that moment? Why did I feel like I wasn't being respected? And why did I allow myself to not be respected if that's the case? And then that actually brought a different element. Instead of it just being like a black and white, almost like stick figure story of this person against me, it brought some color into it. And it actually brought some awareness of the fact that there could be other things that I wasn't actually aware of what this person's motives were. And that the only thing that I really knew was how I was reacting and looking at why.
Thank you, Tracy. Komal, I see your hands up.
Hi, good morning, everybody. It's a very, very interesting topic, and I believe whatever we have discussed so far in last few webinars, self-awareness is the key to everything. To me, it seems like, there's a pattern that we all follow in our living. We all live quite vicariously. We sort of follow the life pattern of our previous generations, our parents and people around us, and we sort of go on carrying quite a lot of things from them. And I think what self-awareness does is that it breaks that pattern of living vicariously. It puts us more in touch with us, our life, our journey, and then enables us to take decisions independently. And so it sort of helps us break away from that mold, because when we are carrying the learnings of past, we end up carrying a lot of traumas also from the past, which is from our parents or the previous generations. And then somebody need to sort of stop passing the buck on to the next generation and resolve. So being self-aware sort of puts us in that place where we actually start to resolve things and learn from them also. So that's what my take is on self-awareness. And it doesn't happen till the time we are aware of, like Tracy said, of our inner scape, and ask ourselves this question as to what is happening in me, and like she's used a very important word, that is trigger. Knowing what triggers you and makes you in a reactive state of mind, instead of thinking through and responding better.
Thank you, Komal. Something you said then really stood out to me, which was stop passing the buck onto the next generation. And I feel as parents, we mirror, how to act as a parent to our children when they eventually become parents themselves. And it's always important to think of that future impact as well that we might be having on our children and their potential parenting style. And I'm wondering maybe if we could look a bit more into the inner self, that inner landscape, and how we should be focusing on that more than on the actions and behaviours of our children. So kind of looking more at ourselves. And I'm wondering, Lorraine, if you could jump in.
Unmuting. Yeah, really very, very relevant perspectives from both Tracy and Komal. I look at it, I would say, even one step further back to say, it's like a canvas. Just pretend that we're a canvas. And to understand who we are, because we can't give what we don't have. In understanding the perspective, first of all, perspectives are different, even within the family. If you have 3 children or 2 children, each child, you're the same parent, and you may be acting a certain way, but each child receives something different. So first of all, understanding who we are as people, totally from ground zero, I would say, quieting down, understanding triggers, as Tracy said, understanding, so that would help us understand our responses. But more than anything is to, I would say, treat ourselves as a canvas. And there are things that are beautiful that we can learn, that we keep, and there are things that we want to imbibe in ourselves and carry that on. So, there's a really nice poem by Khalil Gibran. If you don't mind, I'd like to read it at this stage because it almost sets the tone for the meeting. He's, if for those of you who are not familiar with Khalil Gibran, he's a philosopher, a poet, a writer, I don't know how many centuries ago. And this is something that he wrote in his book, The Prophet, on children. And he says, and a woman who held a babe against her bosom and said, "Speak to us, children." And he said, "Your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes on, not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer sees the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might, that his arrows might go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrow that flies, so he loves the bow that is stable. And this is by Khalil Gibran. So I'm looking at us as the bow that is stable and clearing that canvas and making our own painting.
Lorraine, that's one of my just favorite poems, pieces of writing. I love Khalil Gibran. And something that I always think when I read that is it does depend, though, on the interpretation of what the bow in the bow and arrow actually is to each individual. And I have asked this to a few different parents recently. You know what, I've told them the metaphor and they've gone, oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I was the bow, and they explain how they were. And actually every time it's different. And that's just something I wanted to say, because it's actually really interesting. Yeah, and I think, yeah, it is, because for me, it's stability, and it's letting the arrow be free and making sure that you're there for that strength to let them go as far as they possibly can, but in the direction that you've helped a little bit, but that they choose to go in, because it completely depends on the environment and the weather, if the wind was blowing, and the risks that have happened during that time. And I just wanted to say that because I think that's very interesting on how a parent may interpret it. Komal, I did notice, did you want to jump in?
Yes, absolutely. You said it right, like the bow need to be very strong, yet very flexible too, because the balance of strength and flexibility sort of helps the proper action. And I really liked the poem. It's like a guiding principle for all parents to have the right perspective to for their children. And for me also, this poem also offers a reflection on self as parents, like, a moment to just reflect back on you. So I have a very interesting way of thinking, which is, while I'm analyzing the poem as a parent, I would also have a look at it as a child too, because we all carry in us, a certain part. Like, of course, we have our own children who we parent, there's a child inside also who we parent. So being aware of self is also being aware of that persona inside us, and, also fulfilling its need. So in a way, for me, this poem also carries a meaning that whatever we are offering to the others outside of us, we offer the same to us also. Like Lorraine said, that we cannot give what we don't have. So before we prepare ourselves to give out, I think it's very important to give to self, so that we have that replenished much with us, and we're ready to give out. So yeah, so I think both perspectives kind of hold importance.
So I'm wondering how we can take care of ourselves, so our self-care, and just to keep up with that, if any of you have any tips around self-care and becoming more self-aware. Tracy?
Sure. A big one is setting boundaries. It's actually making sure that you are taking the time out for yourself, and that you're respecting that time for yourself. And only by us respecting the time that we've set aside for ourselves can we expect other people to respect that time as well. A lot of times as parents, we are tempted to make sacrifices for our children. That's what especially mothers, that's what motherhood is portrayed as in many cases. And of course there are sacrifices that we have to make, absolutely. But, it doesn't mean we have to martyr ourselves. And actually nobody likes a martyr, to put it that way, like it's hard as well if we want to teach our children. And I think all of us understand the importance of children growing up to be happy, and children growing up to have their own boundaries, and children growing up to have their own self-care. And they're only going to learn that if they're seeing us do that as well as their parents.
Lorraine, I keep seeing you nod there. Would you like to jump in? Don't forget to unmute yourself.
This is an area I failed miserably. So I'm talking about it from a viewpoint of somebody who did not learn this in the early years. And in fact, when Tracy said, and then how can we teach our children to model this? We can teach them how to model this because they don't want to be what you were or how you were. Seriously. I've been specifically told this by my daughter. She says, Mom, you're like my role model, and I'd love to follow everything you say, what you do. But that's one area I never want to be like you. You just never put your name on the list. So she saw how not to be from seeing how I was. And I guess, I've been reflecting a lot, and I've changed, and I'm really fortunate that I have a family who actually really didn't want me to be that. I was just like on autopilot. Sometimes you could be in a situation where everybody expects you to be that. I have people who have said, oh my gosh, and now my son is married and he comes with this child and I still have to do this and so has to do. My family's not like that. They're really very helpful and supportive. So they can't understand why I'm so crazy. And so I had to do a lot of soul searching as to understand why I was on autopilot doing that. A lot of this came from my upbringing. I had a wonderful mother. And as Komal said earlier, sometimes we continue that pattern. I just love her to pieces, and I think she was amazing. And without quite knowing it in this area, since I didn't reflect too much, it's something I just carried on and was, until my children grew up and they said, that's not right. That's not who we want her to be. So yes, for me, that was an example that I learned of how not to be.
Thank you, Lorraine. I thought that was quite interesting, actually, because I know when we're teenagers as well, we do try to be ourselves and to move away from how our parent was and find our own identity. Yes. And even when parents have tried so hard, the teenagers still trying to find themselves, and sometimes that isn't reflected until they get older, and then they realize how amazing their parents were. Thank you, Lorraine. Komal, I noticed your hand up.
Yeah, so I sort of resonated pretty well with what Lorraine said, because in certain phase of my life, I've been like that, just giving, and never taking time for myself. And I do understand that sometimes that is what is required because the children are younger or smaller or their needs are a priority, but not always. That's not the situation that stays always. And then coming to the beginning of this journey, I realized that why I was doing that, because I was somehow finding my sense of self so deeply invested in just giving that I was overkilling myself. And that I see quite a lot of people around me doing. And that's not right, because at some point of time, your energies deplete and you become so tired that you can't give no more without getting absolutely frustrated. And then you think that, oh, I'm not giving, so I'm not a good mother. And, all those sort of guilt or things come. and it becomes so hard for you to ask things for yourself. So it's self awareness sort of helps put things in perspective, where it teaches you to ask for yourself. And as Tracy said, draw up boundaries. For some people it's just not easy. It comes in a very, very hard way. It comes in a very difficult way. And even when you start to draw boundaries, you start to feel that guilt. Oh, am I doing it right or not? I've also learned it the hard way, but it's a very good lesson that I've learned. And it makes it very easy for me, because I've experienced it, that when you start to take out some time for yourself, when you start to give to yourself, you're actually helping people around you far more than, and then you're also not invested just within your false ego that, oh, I'm the giver, I'm the, giving. Some people will think that asking or receiving is very selfish, or how you could do that. I would say that just trying to be the giver at all times is the most selfish thing you're doing, because you're not allowing others the opportunity to do things for you, to give you. And that reminds me that my daughter gave me 5 tickets on the Mother's Day, which I have to, so she wrote like certain things that I can ask for, like a free time or a movie night, and I just have to give it to her and she will make that happen for me. And yeah, so learning to, I think, to take care of us is equally important, and it makes life so much easier, really.
Thank you, Komal. I love the tickets. That's such a great idea. It made me giggle. I've noticed some comments in the chat, and it's not really a question, but I wanted to raise it anyway, if that's okay. It's from Vanessa, and she says something that has come up for me when I think about self-awareness while parenting through experiences that can be stressful, is that when I felt the need as a parent to exercise my authority in a situation, I have found that I need to be aware of my ego coming through. And I'm wondering if anyone on the panel can kind of relate to that and would like to talk about that a little bit more.
I definitely can relate to that. I think that a lot of times when I'm reacting to something, it is because I'm thinking about how it reflects on me. A lot of times with my children, when I would be critical of them, it would be because there were things that they were doing that I was concerned about being a trait that I had. And so not wanting them to repeat mistakes that I had made, or also just being sometimes, and it's terrible to say this, but being embarrassed. I did that today with my dog. Like I was chastising her because I realized that I was lost in my thoughts and she started barking at something. And I thought people are going to think that like I'm not, disciplining my dog. And so then I started chastising her, but like what she was barking at had already gone down the street. So sometimes it really is just out of this feeling of how you want to project yourself to other people, how you want to project yourself to your children, how you want to project yourself to yourself. And all of those things are ego. And they're human as well.
Thank you, Tracy. Very human. That's the only experience I ever have as a parent is of my dog. So I get completely what you're saying there. And I'm wondering how we, obviously I'm not a parent, but how parents out there become more self-aware. And Komal or Lorraine? Oh, Lorraine.
This thing of ego and also just past practices. I think it's a combination of these two things that come into play. It's like, oh, when we are questioned, if we are trying to tell our children something and then they say, let me give you an example that will make it a little more clear. So when our daughter was getting married, one of the things that she said was, I'd like to get married outside in nature. And she chose a spot. And she chose her brother, who was then only 21, as the officiate. My husband and myself were like, really? I mean, we love him to pieces. He's a great kid. And he turned 21. We want some gray hair for somebody to actually get you married. We want, you have this thing of a priest. I mean, I'm Catholic and they grew up, and I got married in a church. My husband is not. But I mean, we're traditional to some degree. And I was like, oh, really? And it took us a lot of adjusting to understand. And she said, Mom, two things. Mom and Dad, two things. I feel closer to God when I'm in nature. And this was a beautiful venue. It was in the nature center. It had a stream behind, it had a cascade of plants. And she just felt that that's where she wanted the actual ceremony to be done, not with any stiffness and in a structure. That's what made her and her husband feel good about a place to get married. It took us a long time to wrap our minds around that. I mean, not that we argued, but I know the process we went through. And not that anything she was saying was irrational, it was just generations of how it should be. And then the thing about having her brother be the officiate and marry her when he was 21. And, we knew somebody who was this amazing judge / attorney who, would be, had a stature and who could get them married. And she said, so what does that do for me? He doesn't know me personally. And she said, Mom, Dad, why do you think that wisdom is related to age? And we said, oh, you're right. So I want somebody, and both her and her husband just get along with my son and think he's amazing. And he is amazing. But in our minds, he's an amazing kid. He's 21. I mean, no, we need gray hair to get you married. And that was an adjustment. And you start to realize how much of our own thoughts and value system we put into our bringing up our children, which is why we need to listen to them. They are our teachers. And we have grown so much because when you bring up your children to be independent thinking, you have to be ready for that, okay? Because they're constantly, they're used to engagement. They will constantly be telling you things or discussing things with you, asking you things and pushing back, so.
Thank you, Lorraine.
I got distracted because somebody wrote something about they would like to raise the issue of divorced parents. So sorry.
No, don't worry. We can look at that. But I think there's actually a comment just before that which was addressed at Komal, and it says it's from Shalini, and it says, I think that while I become aware and start drawing those boundaries, if others are not growing along with me by also being aware, then it may become more difficult. Any thoughts? And I think anyone in the panel can answer this, but Komal, if you could go first.
Yes. Thank you so much, Shalini, for putting that question. I think first off, it's quite a natural process that when we start to make certain changes in us, we would like to immediately want to see the impact or effect of those changes in our surroundings. But one important question to ask ourselves in that given situation is also that our self-awareness or our effort to change is our own choice. And likewise, other people also have their own choices. And they may or may not be at that point where they feel that they also need to be changed. So if this thing is coming in you that, others are not growing or changing with me, where is that desire coming from? So that is also a moment of self-awareness. Like while you're being aware of yourself, you got to let go of that desire for the rest of the people, because it's a free will or a free choice of other people. That's the first thing. And second, I think, and I have seen it, that if you persist on your own awareness, that sort of start to percolate slowly and gradually. But if you just stay on, leaving this desire to see a certain kind of response from other people, it definitely impacts your surroundings, but it begins from you. As they say that every good thing starts from home. So your home is right here, 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 and this body. So if you start it from here and not bother as much about what others are doing, they'll start to catch your vibes and they'll start to adapt accordingly. I hope that sort of answers.
Thank you, Komal. Lorraine or Tracy, would you like to add anything? Okay. If not, there's been a comment made from Silvana from Uruguay, and she has said, I would like to raise the issue of divorced parents. And I think this is just something for us all to think about, really, is sometimes we see traits in our children that remind us of the traits in our former partner that led us to divorce. So it's only natural that we need emotional management at this time, and we must manage our emotions carefully so as not to overlap our feelings. And I think that's a really important thing to share there. I would love at this moment to move on to acceptance, because I'm very wary of time as well. It's going too quick. Such a good conversation. And Komal, I must say, it's very beautiful that there's a newborn baby I can hear in the background whilst you're speaking, and it made me smile. I thought, how perfect for this topic. Okay, so in acceptance, panelists, how can parents move towards being okay in their own skin and their brain and their own emotions? Who would like to go first there? Tracy.
Yes, I would like to talk about a very favorite topic of mine, or not a favorite emotion, but guilt. So guilt is a major block towards acceptance. And that's something that a lot of us have as parents. And so I found for myself to sort of move beyond that, because it definitely affected me as a parent in many ways, that it was necessary, or it still is necessary, because I'm still a parent, my children are grown. But I really need to have, and I saw this beautiful YouTube video that they coined a term, non-judgmental reflection. And so that sort of reflection and looking back on maybe the way I responded in a situation and why I did that, and trying to not associate judgment with that, as opposed to ruminating on something and feeling like I'm in the loop of, I'm a terrible person. Why did I do that? I hate it when I get angry. I hate it when I react this way. Hate, negative, 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 right? And one of the things that I have found for myself to look at is to almost remove myself and look at myself as I would someone else I love. And look at myself as I would if it was a friend talking to me and saying, this happened, and I yelled at this person and I feel terrible, you know? And I would say, yeah, but think of how hard you've been working, and think about this, and think about all of these other things. And so without making excuses for oneself, it's an understanding of what was happening for me while that took place. Where was I at? You know, maybe I hadn't slept well the night before, maybe this had happened, maybe I had been worried about something. And so sort of putting it into that context and reflecting on the situation, and then thinking about maybe how next time I would maybe just engage differently, but also just accepting the fact that I messed up. I messed up, and it doesn't make me a terrible human, and I'm going to move on. And that, I think, speaking again from looking back on my role as a parent before, I was always in this loop of feeling guilty and bouncing back and forth between trying to make things up to my kids and then, you know, messing up again and just going back and forth into this thing. So they were getting a lot of permissiveness because I felt bad. And then they were getting a lot of reaction from me and not a lot of presence. So I think that self-acceptance is the first step, and being present in order to break that.
Thank you, Tracy. And I'm wondering, how does being accepting of oneself help us to be more accepting of others? And Lorraine, if you could go in, that'd be brilliant.
You know, one of the methodologies that I've used through the times that my kids were young and growing up, and I continue to use it even now, is being fallible and being vulnerable. Which doesn't mean that, you know, everything is okay or everything. There may be some things that you're working with and through that you need a longer time. But discussing it, being open about it, and saying, hey, I'm struggling with this, or I didn't like how I didn't like what happened then. I'm thinking about how to do this better. Oftentimes I'd ask for help. I'd say, could you call me on this every time you see me doing this? This is not something I like about how I respond, or how I react. I'd like to respond. I would ask for help. This does a couple of things. One is it creates a different level of trust in the family. Because you're out there, you're not showing up as perfect. And I recall telling my children this. I said, you know, you guys are not the only ones who's learning. I'm learning too. And as long as I'm living, I'll be learning. I do believe that when our learning in this life is done, we're dead. So I say, like, if I'm 90 years old, there's the next aspects I'm going to learn. And there's some things you guys see differently that I haven't seen. And there's some things that I can share. So it becomes more of a conversation. It becomes more of an exchange. And you'll be surprised from how early you can engage with your family in this kind of a conversation. You do not have to wait for them to be in their 20s. I started doing this when they were like 3 and 6 years old. And I would actually ask their feedback, because having been in corporate for 12 years before I became a stay-at-home mom, I realized, I said, when we're at work, we get feedback from our supervisors. Who are my bosses currently? My children. So I started to ask them how I was doing and what did you feel? And of course they'd complain. Mom, when you did that, it made us feel so bad. Or, you know, they'd write letters, but there was that engagement. And there's some things I didn't agree. And I'd say, no, I can't still see this. I need to understand more. And they'd accept it as my acceptance journey. So I think it resulted in a really, really healthy environment and exchange. That's one area I must say that I'm really satisfied with, having had that engagement. And it's a practice. It's not, to me, it was not hard, but it's a practice that is very well worth experimenting with.
Lorraine, I wrote down 3 things that you said then that I've got to read back because they resonated with me. The first one was, as long as I'm living, I'm learning. I really like that. And that you asked for feedback from your children because they're your bosses. That was a great perspective. Thank you. And Komal, I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit on that, around self-acceptance and how important that is in family dynamics.
To me, acceptance is like allowance. So when you accept yourself, that means you've allowed yourself to be who you are. And I absolutely believe that till the time you accept yourself completely, it's always difficult to accept people around you. But I'm not saying that it's not possible. There have been people, and I've been one of those people for a long part, who would have this absolute massive open heart for everybody outside, would accept people the way they are, but have been so critical about self. And that sort of takes away the authenticity from you, because you're different for yourself, you're different for other people. And it's so hard for people to gauge you, so hard for the people to understand you or know you, because you're not so self-accepting of yourself, you're not that open with the people outside of you. So that means you're not allowing yourself to come across the way you are. People would never know who you are. They would never know how to be with you, how to treat you. And that will never be able to create the kind of harmony you would like to have in the relationships with yourself, coming to you, and vice versa for the other people. So if there is no acceptance in the family members, whether you're not accepting yourself or whether you are very critical of people in your family, that directly impacts rules. But we don't just create crave for harmony in relationship. Everybody also craves for a lot of intimacy, and that intimacy is not possible without self-acceptance. So that's why I think it's very, very important to accept yourself the way you are, and then to just let it spread out to the other people, and be less critical, more allowing.
Thank you, Komal. And can we maybe explore a bit more about how that self-acceptance can create an environment of acceptance and openness within the home? And I'm wondering, Tracy, if you could jump in.
Absolutely. So again, sort of touching on the fact that our children learn from us, and they learn, as we know, from our state of being, not our state of what we talk about necessarily, and not even always what we do. They're very intuitive, and they can sense when there's incongruence. So if we want others to, if we want our children to accept themselves, they need to see us accepting ourselves. Similarly, if we want them to accept other people, they need to see that level of acceptance. And also there's something that I absolutely love it, and I would love to just be able to study more and more and more about it. But there's something that Carl Rogers brought up in his book on becoming a person. And that is that as a therapist, he said within the therapy relationship, the change starts when there's a level of acceptance felt from the client and also from the therapist. And I just found this really fascinating. And I think he calls it a curious paradox in his book, because only through the acceptance of what is can change begin. So what we tend to do often with ourselves and with our children and our people around us is we focus on what we want to change. And then we almost give energy to the thing that we don't want to be. So we're focusing on a behavior that we don't want to happen, and we're actually spending a lot of energy and time on that versus creating an atmosphere of acceptance, and then perhaps through that the behavior will shift. So I'm not here saying I know exactly how that works. I just find that to be, yes, I'll switch. Yes, please, Komal, rescue me.
Yeah, Tracy, I absolutely agree with what you've said and shared right now. And it's quite amazing, so I would like to share an example of how this self-acceptance sort of helped me. And so after my second baby, I put on quite a lot of weight, and which I could never let go of. So I was like this very bulky, heavy, overweight mom. And I sort of didn't like the way I looked. And I was like, oh my God, I must do something. I must lose weight and things like that. And I tried to be more active and eat, less fat or things like that, whatever we know how to lose weight and all of that. But nothing worked, sort of. And then again, somewhere I read about this, like to make any change happen, you need to first bring yourself up to the level of acceptance. And so I sort of thought about it, and I said, maybe I'm not doing something in the right manner. So what I started to do and how it really worked was, I said, okay, first of all, I need to change this mindset of me not liking myself. This is who I am. My body supports my children. I feed them, and they've come through it, and it's a sacred space for me. It's my body. I must love it the way it is. So So I had this crazy thing. So I sort of spoke to my body like it's a living, of course it is a living being. So I sort of spoke to my body and said, listen, I accept you and I'm sorry that I had that negative point of view about you. And this, fat or whatever sort of supported me so far. And I agree that because I was to do so much of work, I needed more energy. So it's good that I had these, fat deposited around. I said, but this work is done, right? Now I need to be a little more active. So you can go now. You've supported me so far, but now you can change, sort of. So I sort of told my body, literally allowed it, accepted it with love. And I say, I love you. I don't despise you, but you can change now. And after that, I didn't make any drastic change in my everyday living. I was active at the same pace, same level. You'll be surprised, I started to lose weight regularly, like every 15 days or month. My body will come back to a shape which I wanted it to be. So if it can happen at that level, at a somatic level within us, I can't just imagine what acceptance can do to the people around us and to the relationships that we carry. So, like you've said, I've seen that happening in my life. That first level is acceptance, first level is that love that you have to give, and then, change happens.
What a lovely example of self-acceptance. I really enjoyed listening to that. And Lorraine?
It's a brilliant example because it's very visual in a sense, and it's a lot of people struggle with that, and she can quantify it and measure. One of the things to add through this whole discussion is love. And in all these, whether we are trying to be better or change something within ourselves or externally, it is love. I actually was wondering about this whole parenting thing now that we're doing these webinars, and we have a bunch of friends. And I was a little amazed that almost all, 20 families, everybody has kids who are really happy, good, well-functioning people at all different ages and stages. And I asked one of them, I said, I wonder what it is. What's the common thread? And we started to find that there's two things. One is, of course, love that was unconditional. Different people had different challenges. Maybe not everybody was at the same economic situation and such, but there was love and there was openness. So when you're open, there is acceptance. When there's love, there's that feeling of acceptance. So they're all intertwined. And, there's so many ingredients in how to make the stew or the pot or whatever recipe you're trying to do. And it can be tweaked. But I think the main ingredient is love. And when you have love and then you layer that self-awareness, because then you're open and flexible, then you can keep tweaking it with whatever, your specific need is as a family, as a child, as each person. But it's that love. So Komal, it's interesting that you had that self-love, which your body listened to. I haven't read too many of his books, but there's an author called Bruce Lipton, I believe, if anyone is familiar with him, where he talks, you are, about the biology and physiology of emotion. So.
Thank you, Lorraine. Komal, did you want to jump in there?
I was just trying to say to Lorraine that yes, I've heard about Bruce Lipton and read a bit about his work, not much in detail, but really all these things are, and she's right, love is that secret ingredient for everything to become possible in life. It's again like a child. So if you want a child to do something, you can make them do anything with a lot of love and patience. But if you just whack them and say that, oh, you're not good and I want you to do this, what you do is you take away their self uh, respect, and then you take away their confidence. And same thing happens with us also. If we be so critical and hard about ourselves, we'll have no confidence. Eventually we'll be doubting ourselves, and coming to parent with us from a space of self-doubt and not self-love is the biggest blunder. Yeah, so I
Thank you,
think
Komal.
Lorraine is right, and so is Tracy. Self-love is very important. Yeah.
Definitely. And I think what Lorraine said, that everything is all intertwined, is really important to consider in all of this. And I just wanted to read a comment from George. It's not a question, but I think it's a really good comment to make. And George has said, when I have difficulty parenting, I can accept that it does not influence my self-worth in any way. And learning to accept ourselves can be a challenge, especially when we have been hyper-focusing on our negative traits. But learning to accept ourselves isn't only good for us, it is good for our parenting. So when we accept ourselves, great things start to happen in our parenting. Thank you, George. I just thought that was lovely. I thought I'd share it for our viewers on YouTube who can't read the chat box. Okay, now in our remaining 10 minutes, I would like to kind of close off with leadership and how leadership is a parenting skill. And I think, Lorraine, if you don't mind, I'd like to come to you first, because we've had some very interesting conversations about leadership and parenting. And I'm wondering what dimensions there are to leadership and parenting.
To me, leadership is influencing. Leadership is not managing. Leadership is not authoritarian. Plain and simple, leadership is influencing. And parenting is leadership because parenting is influencing. You cannot make your children do anything. They may agree because they're afraid for a little while, but it's not going to resonate well. But if you model a behavior that they feel that, whoa, I would love to be like that, that's influence. And you've been successful as a parent. So to me, that's, and that's why I want to bring that into the organization, because I coach senior executives. The whole environment in the company and the culture, if you will, starts from the top. So oftentimes when companies bring me in to talk to their leadership team, I first sit with the CEO and get a 360 and understand what people think about him or her and how they think about what they'd like to have be the company to be, because that is influence. You can't say one thing and be another. You have to be the change, or you have to be what you want. And then the tweaks happen.
Very nice. I like that very much. Do you know, you reminded me of a quote I've heard. Now, I don't know where I've heard this quote. I cannot quote the person that said the quote, but it stuck in my head. So someone somewhere said, leadership is literally lead a ship. And that's, for me, as for parenting, you are literally leading a ship through to safety, to reaching its destination, to going on its journey. There's so many different areas to that metaphor. So that's what really resonated with me then. Thank you, Lorraine. And Tracy.
Yes, well, sort of further to what Lorraine was saying about influencing, and I was thinking about the most influential, oh my goodness, and inspirational leaders. What do they have? They definitely have charisma, but they also have passion. They actually have a sense of passion and a sense of purpose about what they're doing. And so, again, as parents, are we passionate about what we're doing? Are we showing an authenticity to our children and to our family about our roles as their parents, about our roles in our outside world, whether or not that's, with other people or in the workplace or with their teachers? Do we come home and have disempowering conversations where we're venting about things that have happened and then showing perhaps an incongruence to them? So I think that, it's really important for us to be really authentic and really passionate about what we're doing. And also, and I've seen a lot of this, is a lot of times as parents, we have ideas about what we want our kids to do, and we'll sometimes really sort of try to propel them into leadership roles. But is that what they want? Is that what they're passionate about? So that's, I think that's something that's really important to think about.
Thank you, Tracy. Do you know, today I've been developing our youth course at Coacharya, and focusing on passion and purpose and meaning. And that's something that I've been looking into today, is with parents kind of deciding on the purpose for their children, and that's what we think is right for them to be able to achieve. But actually, everyone has their own unique kind of purpose and passion, and we're there to help steer them towards that. So thank you for sharing. And Komal, I'm wondering what type of leadership that we should try to be exhibiting as parents, as an example for our children.
Leadership has always been quite a curious issue for me, because I happen to believe, and I think that we all are leaders and we all are followers also. We just choose where we lead and where we follow, sort of thing. And there was a very interesting talk on YouTube by Simon Sinek, where he says that parenting is the closest thing to leadership. And it's quite interesting for anybody who would like to go and watch it. It's a very beautiful perspective. And when it comes to parenting, I think as parents, how we come across with our children, it's like a team. For me, the whole dynamics of family is like a team, where parents are responsible for certain tasks and actions, and then children also bring certain value, which is quite unique, and although they are the future and they have to go ahead and make something in life, and like you said, that sometimes parents are tempted to tell them or to show them as to what they should be. But I think being a parent leader, I think more important is that not to give a vision to the children, but to just show them how to get a vision for themselves. And the same thing, I think, like in organization, they say that, a leader's role is to give the vision. But I think it has to be a shared vision. And same thing happens in the families also. That if you have a shared vision, and then if you're just teaching each other the skill sets so that they can lead on their own eventually, and not to follow you in making their decisions, because that is what they'll be expected to do, whether they are in a position of leadership or not. But from certain point in our lives, we all lead. At least we are leading our lives. We are the leaders of our own lives, so to say. So to have all those skill sets, I think parenting or this home team is the first institution which can make so much of difference in making the leaders of futures.
Thank you, Komal. Making the leaders of the future. I like that ending. So we've come to the end of the hour. I have noticed that Victoria had her hand raised. I'm so sorry, we won't have time to come to your question right now, but you can join us on our LinkedIn page, which is called Parenting with a Coaching Mindset. And hopefully we'll be able to answer that there. Does anyone on the panel have any remaining kind of final remarks about leadership and parenting before we go? No final questions? Oh, have fun. I like that, Lorraine. That's a really good final remark. Enjoy it, have fun, be a great leader, and create some great, wonderful, lovely, compassionate leaders too. And please do join us next week's webinar. Myself and I'm going to get his name spelled wrong, Stefano Di Lollo. I hope I pronounced his name right, will be joining me for a webinar on social media pressures. This webinar is going to be for parents, and we're also going to look at the pressures that children and teenagers may be facing as well. So do join us for that. And thank you very much for today. And as I said before, join us for more conversation on LinkedIn, Parenting with a Coaching Mindset group. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you very much, everyone on the panel and everyone that's watching.